You are allowed. Mahdi, that one. When that Hassan Mahdi was known as Sahib, the one-eyed Caliph Mahdi.
Right, okay. So I'm going to carry on. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Right, so as I mentioned, the Dajjal will be able to do many tricks, and this will be given, this power will be given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to test the believers. Like I said, the Dajjal will be a massive test. Right, just a minute. Okay, right, moving on. He will move around with a large army and plunder many lands. He will then attempt to gain entry into Makkah and Medina. What we've got to understand is that Dajjal will not be able to enter Makkah and Medina. He will be able to enter Makkah and Medina, but how will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then purify Makkah and Medina? What will happen is there'll be 3 earthquakes. There'll be an earthquake in the east, an earthquake in the west, a major earthquake, and there'll also be an earthquake in Makkah and Medina. That will be so that any hypocrites that are residing in Makkah and Medina, they will actually come out of Makkah and Medina and they'll join the Dajjal. Okay, so hence he will not be able to enter Makkah. He will then proceed to Medina and halt on the outskirts of Medina before Mount Uhud. There's an area outside Medina even now. I think in Arabic it's mentioned as Sabakh. It's a wide area where the Dajjal will reside. That area where the Dajjal will reside has already been made. It's already been made. And when Dajjal resides on the outskirts of Medina, he will be able to see the pillars of Medina Sharif from the area he's residing in, and he will say to his followers, can you see the palace of Ahmad with the white minarets? So basically the preparation for Dajjal to come has already started. Okay. Medina during that time will have 7 gates. 2 angels will be standing guard over each of these gates, and the Dajjal will be unable to enter Medina. He will then travel towards Damascus, where okay, I have a question here, just a minute. If he's not allowed to enter Makkah and Medina, he can go anywhere else. So what about pure Muslims on the other side of the world? What will happen to them? Right, okay, so like I just mentioned, he will be able to enter Makkah and Medina, right? And I will mention later on, those people who are not in Makkah and Medina, how will they protect themselves from Dajjal? I'm going to discuss that. Don't worry, okay? Inshallah, I will discuss that. Okay. So he will then travel towards Damascus, where Mahdi alayhi salam will be living. Mahdi alayhi salam will prepare a Muslim army to fight Dajjal. While preparing for battle against Dajjal, Isa alayhi salam, resting his hands on the shoulders of 2 angels, will descend from heaven. He will alight on the eastern minaret of the Jami Masjid of Damascus. Okay. Right, okay, now, a question many people ask, that has Dajjal been born? Because there is a hadith which mentions that Dajjal will be born to a mother and father. He's not somebody who's just going to appear all of a sudden. He will be born just like he'll be a human being who will be given extraordinary powers. Okay. Now there are hadith which mention that he'll be born, and there's also another hadith which I'd like to mention. It's known as the hadith of Tamim Dari rahmatullahi alayhi. So the story the story says, Fatima bint Qais radiyallahu ta'ala anha, who's a Sahabiya. She was in the mosque of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, They prayed behind the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ stood up to give a khutbah, and he said that everybody stay where they are because I want to mention something. And he said that, do you know why? Do you know why I've congregated you people, you Sahaba? I've congregated you because somebody called Tamim Dari, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was in that congregation, he was a Christian who embraced Islam. But what made him embrace Islam is the story that is very inspiring. So Tamim Dari radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrates that they were on a sea voyage. They were on a sea voyage, and there were 30 men on the ship, and the men were from Lakham and Juzam. They're two tribes. The sea, what happened was there was the sea then started playing with the meaning that there were many waves because of which they were about to drown. So they took a smaller kind of boat and they sailed towards an island. So when they got to the island, they were met by a beast. This beast was a very hairy beast. It was so hairy they could not tell the back of the beast from the front. They could not tell, where the face is and where the back is. It was such a hairy beast. So the hairy beast in Arabic is known as the Jassasa. So the Jassasa said, I am a spy, and I'd like you to go to the monastery over there and meet the person inside. So Tamim Dari, to cut the story short, Tamim Dari, he became very scared. Even the other men were scared that we don't know, who's inside that monastery. It could be a jinn, it could be a shaitan, it could be a devil. So when they went inside the monastery, they found a big-bodied man who they'd never seen before. He was firmly tied up. His hands were tied to his neck, and he asked them. So the guy who was tied up, he asked them, "Who are you?" They replied, "Inform us about yourself." So they said that we are from Arabia, and they said the whole story, and that the Jassasa came, he met us, and he told us to come to the monastery. So Dajjal then asked a few questions. He asked, he said, "Inform me of the lake of Tiberias. It's known as Tabariya in Arabic. Is there still water in it?" And then another question he asked was, has anybody emerged in Makkah who's propagating Islam? And they replied in the affirmative that there is, and many people have followed him. He asked again, have the Arabs fought with him? So Tamim Dari rahmatullahi alayhi asked, he replied yes, and then he asked, how are they treating him? So they replied that sometimes the Prophet ﷺ and his companions are gaining the upper hand. Sometimes the disbelievers are gaining the upper hand. So Dajjal then, he said that there'll be a time very close when the river Tabariya will actually soak up. There'll be no water left. And he also mentioned regarding the fountain of Zughar. And he also said that it'll be better for the people of Arabia, that the Dajjal actually said, that it'll be better for the people of Arabia that they follow this person. And then he said that, behold, I am the Dajjal. Okay, there's a time coming when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will release me. I'll be coming into the world for 40 days, and I'll be trying to enter Makkah and Medina, but again there'll be angels at the gate, and I will be able to enter. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, in the hadith, he says that, and he says that Dajjal is in the Syrian Sea or the Yemen Sea. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, no, rather he's in the eastern direction. He then pointed out with his hands towards the east. So Allah Ta'ala knows best whether the Dajjal is born or not, or whether he's still somewhere existing in the world. Okay. So what signs will take place before the Dajjal actually appears? So first of all, the Imam Mahdi will appear. Um, Another sign is a great famine will take place. There'll be a famine for 3 years before he appears. In the first year of the famine, um, the sky will withhold its crops. The rain and the earth will withhold its crops. In the second year, 2/3, and in the third year, there'll basically be no food and water. And the only way a Muslim would survive will be with the tasbih and the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at that time, the Dajjal will supply everything. He'll supply food and water. He'll have magic tricks where he'll be able to supply food and water to those who believe in him. Okay, we have a question here. Famine means drought. What it basically means is that there'll be no food and there'll be no water. The skies will not rain and there'll be nothing growing from the earth. Okay, I mean, in England we don't see that because we're very lucky. Food is imported from other countries, but in those countries, where they actually grow rice and crops and fruit, etc., they understand that if the farm doesn't grow anything, how much difficulty they can go through. Okay, the next hadith mentions the Dajjal's parents. So his father will be tall and thin and his nose will be pointed like a beak, while his mother will be fat with 2 long hands. They will both remain without a child for 30 years, and all of a sudden after 30 years, they'll have a one-eyed son. And the hadith mentions whose heart will remain awake while he stays asleep. So the kind of things that will take place before actually the Dajjal he becomes the Dajjal will be kind of weird anyway. And the hadith also mentions that the Arabs will be less in numbers. They'll either be weak or less in numbers. And at that time, there'll be very less religious scholars. There'll be very less people where a person can actually learn Islam from. And I always say to my students in madrasa, we need to value the fact that we have madrasas, we have places where we can acquire knowledge of deen, because there'll be a time where the madrasas will be shut down, and the only way a person can pass knowledge to their children will be by having knowledge themselves. Okay, do we have another question here? Is the Dajjal born here? I already answered that question. One hadith says he already exists, and another hadith says that he'll be born. So is the Dajjal born here? We have no idea. He could be existing in the world. So I really don't know how to reconcile between both of the hadiths, whether he's born yet or not. We do not know, but we do know for definite that he will emerge before the Day of Judgment. Okay. I mean, if you want to go into more detail regarding the Dajjal, I have a lecture which I've done in the past, which I can forward onto the group, or I can forward onto yourself. You can listen to that, and it has a lot of detail regarding the signs of Qiyamah. The earth itself will disclose a lot of treasure so the Dajjal will find treasure where people won't find it. He'll basically be like a king. People who follow him will achieve what they want. And there's a hadith which also mentions that the Dajjal will stop at a place called Markanat near Taif. It's in Saudi Arabia. And on hearing this, the first people to join the Dajjal will be the women. The women will get very excited on hearing that, there's a person who's coming and he's doing magic tricks, just like, who's that famous magician? What's his name? Dynamo, that's it. People get excited. But the reality is that behind those magic tricks, there's a lot of mischief going on, which can take a person out of the fold of Islam. So the first people to meet the Dajjal will be the Jews. The women will then meet the Dajjal to such an extent that the men will have to tie their women in the house so that they don't meet the Dajjal. Right. Okay. So to finish off this session, one last thing. So now the question, as somebody asked me already. Oh, hold on. There's another question here. Very good question. In the battle of the Mahdi, will the fight be using machinery like guns and tanks, or will he use swords? See, again, it's a very good question. You know, there's a hadith which mentions that Dajjal will come on a mule, and between the ears of that mule there'll be like 40 cubits. So it could be that the Dajjal will go around the world in 40 days, on in an aeroplane. We don't know. You know, one day will be equal to a year, another day equal to a month, another day equal to a week, and the rest of the days will be normal days. So, will machinery still exist at that time? I don't have an opinion, but my gut feeling does say that we may go back to an age where technology will be dismantled, technology will be destroyed, and we may go back to horses, riding horses. I really don't know. I mean, there's a hadith which mentions that before the day of Qiyamah, before the day of judgment, the Quran Sharif will disappear. You know, what does that mean? So it could be that the Quran, that a virus, you know, now somebody could say, well, I have a mobile phone, right? I have a Quran Sharif in there. A virus might come, a certain virus which, you know, which takes over technology. So, you know, to be honest, we have the hadith, but how will it really happen? We can only find out when that event actually happens. Anyway, so to finish off, how do you protect ourselves from the Dajjal? This is the really important part, because if you're in Makkah and Medina, you can protect yourself, right? But those people who are in other parts of the world, how do they protect themselves? So the first hadith is recitation of Surah Kahf. I say to my students as well, every Friday, make a habit of reciting the whole Surah Kahf, because the virtues of Surah Kahf are immense. And as a minimum, if you can't do that, recite the first 10 verses and the last 10 verses of Surah Kahf. And even better, you need to memorize Surah Kahf. Why? Because if Dajjal appears in your lifetime and you are to confront the Dajjal, by reading the verses of Surah Kahf, Dajjal cannot touch you. Dajjal cannot touch you. There'll actually be a man who will appear at the time of Dajjal, and he will say to Dajjal's army that I want to meet the Dajjal. So Dajjal will give him permission to cut it short. And when he sees the Dajjal, you know, he'll make an announcement and say that I believe that you are the same Dajjal which the Holy Prophet has spoken about. So when he says that, Dajjal will get very angry. Dajjal will take him and he'll chop him in half, literally chop him in half. He'll chop him in half and he'll walk in between the two pieces of the human being, and he'll then use his power given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he'll make the person alive again. And then when the person is alive again, the person will say to the Dajjal, I have even more faith now that you're the true Dajjal, regarding which the Holy Prophet has said, because Prophet already said this in the hadith. So the Dajjal will get angry again and he'll try to kill him again. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that great saint's neck, he'll make it into a copper, where the Dajjal will try to kill him, but he won't be able to do that. So then the Dajjal will be given paradise and hell. So what he'll do is he'll put him inside the fire that he has, but Allah Ta'ala will make that paradise, and the paradise that the Dajjal has, Allah Ta'ala will make that the fire of hell. So, and it comes in a hadith that that person will be the most pious person on the face of the earth when the Dajjal appears. So again, so one way of protecting ourselves is to recite Surah Kahf. Very, very important. We need to make a habit of that. The second thing is seeking refuge in Allah Ta'ala. You know, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal actually relates in a hadith in the Musnad Ahmad that in Qaida at the end of Salah, after reading at-tahiyyat and after reading Durood Sharif and after reading Allahumma inni zalamtu nafsi, a person should recite the dua, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhabi jahannam wa a'udhu bika min adhabi al-qabr wa a'udhu bika min fitnati al-mahya wal mamat wa a'udhu bika min fitnati al-masih ad-dajjal. According to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahmatullahi alayhi, it's wajib to recite this. So you can read this dua in Salah. Also, staying miles apart. What I mean by that is staying away from those things which can cause misfortune and can take a person towards the Dajjal. And when you hear about the Dajjal, it's not about going to meet him. Stay away from the Dajjal as much as you can. Okay. The next prescription is the safe haven of Makkah and Medina. And number 5 is having knowledge about the Dajjal. I've already said the Dajjal will appear at a time when nobody will recognize him anymore. But if you have a minority will all still be alive who know about the Dajjal. If you have that knowledge, you can pass it on to your children, and inshallah they'll be saved from the fitna or mischief of the Dajjal. Okay, so I'm going to stop my session here. I hope you learned something from this session. Inshallah, we'll carry on next week. Does anybody have any questions before we terminate the session? You can write your question in the chat box. I'll wait a few minutes.